8print.co. The number 8, print.co. How much does it cost to print magazines or books?
Our Heidelberg 8-color web offset, and I'm going to take you to our third 8-color press, and that
8print.co. The number 8, print.co. How much does it cost to print magazines or books? We're going to go into it in this video. We're going to cover the short answer first and then the long answer next, if you're really interested. And I do recommend that you listen to the whole long answer, because if you're going to be spending money and if you're going to be working with a printer, it really helps you and it helps the printer. In other words, it'll help your project turn out as perfectly as possible if you really understand the printing process. And it'll help you negotiate a good price as well. But before we start on the short answer, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up on this YouTube video. It's down here or down here somewhere. If you click the thumbs up, it'll help us get found, and I think you'll really appreciate the information that we give you. It will save you a good deal of money and probably raise the quality of your printing a lot. Okay, so here's the short answer. Asking how much it costs to print magazines or books is like asking, how much does it cost to build houses? It really is. It depends on how high a quality you want the house, right? How big you want the house, and how many houses you want built. I guarantee you, you build one house on the beach in Santa Monica, it'll cost you $1 million to $3 million to build that house, right? But you build 100 houses in a housing community out in Riverside, California, or Las Vegas, Nevada, just on the outskirts of Las Vegas, and each house will probably cost you, what, $70,000? So how many, what is that? That's like 15 times cheaper? Yeah, no, 30 times cheaper. You could build 30 houses for the price it costs you to build one house in Santa Monica. And that's just, I'm not counting the land. I'm just counting the cost to actually build the house itself. Printing is exactly the same way. So while there are about eight major factors that impact the cost of your printing for books, magazines, or even brochures, the main three are going to be quality, size, and quantity. That having been said, we just got an email from one of our clients, a photographer, and he asked, well, don't you have any general prices printing packages? So he's asking for general prices, just something to where he can start ballparking or pre-estimating the cost it'll cost him to build a self-promotional book, launch a test magazine or whatnot. And yes, what you can do, go to our app. There's a pricing estimating app on our website, 8print.co/app, 8print.co/app. Download the app. There's an iPhone and an Android version, and it'll give you some general prices. But having said that, now I'm going to start getting into the long answer. And before I get into the long answer, just one last chance. If you haven't given us a thumbs up yet, I'd really appreciate that thumbs up right about now, because you won't have a chance to, no matter how much you love this video, you won't have a chance to give us a thumbs up after we give you the long answer, because you'll be too busy going back to our website to get an estimate from us, is at least our hope.
So we're in the press room now. And this is our Heidelberg. Heidelberg Harris.
Okay, long answer. When you download that app and you start getting print cost estimates from the app, you'll notice something funny at about the 100 copy, 200 copy, 500 copy, 1,000 copy level. Remember, this is getting into the long answer. There's really no difference between 100 copies and 500 copies. There's a slight difference, but why is that? Technically, there's no difference at all. The only reason our app has any difference, it's like, let's say you wanted to print a 32-page book and you wanted 500 copies, and it's a regular letter-sized book. If it costs $5 each to print 500, that's $2,500, right? Well, if you're only printing 100 copies, it's going to cost $24.93 each. That's almost the same. 100 at $24.93 each is almost as much as 500 at $5 each. Right? They both come out to right about $2,500. Why is that? Well, technically there's no difference at all. It should have just been the same. The cost to print 500 books or 500 magazines is exactly the same cost for us to print 100 or to print just one. Really, it is. Then why does the app say anything different? Well, if we gave you the same price for 100 or 500, people would start emailing us and say, hey, I think there's a glitch in your app. I'm not kidding you. That's what happens. So that's the only reason we changed the price. Then, wait a second. Why is it that printing 500 and printing 100 is exactly the same price? Here again, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is this. Paper comes in reams of 500 in general, in packets of 500. And these are large sheets of paper. They're bigger than most posters you see walking down a random street in New York City. They're large, broadsheets. On these broadsheets, you can print 8 up per side of a magazine page or a book or whatever it is. You can put 8 pages. So 8.5 by 11s fit on these things, and they come in packets of 500. So if you wanted 500 copies, all we'd have to do is finish printing an entire 500 packet, and you're done. Let's say you only wanted the first 100. Well, what do we do with the rest of the 400 sheets of paper? Number one, the 400 sheets of paper can't really be reused again. What do you mean? Why can't you reuse the rest of that paper? For my inkjet or laser printer, I open up a ream of 500 sheets of paper. I use 2 sheets, and I let the rest of it sit for a year and a half, and I can still use it at the end of the year and a half. Short answer, professional print shops can't really do that. So there's a lot of waste. If you order 100 sheets of paper, we still have to use all 500 of those sheets and throw away 400. That's just how it is. Yeah, we can recycle it, but you know what happens to recycled paper? It actually costs more than non-recycled paper. And that part, I don't really understand why. I'm sure somebody in the audience can research that, and I'm sure there's a really logical, simple reason, but it does. Recycled paper is more expensive than non-recycled paper. Now here's the long answer as to why we can't use the rest of that 400 sheets of paper when you only wanted 100 copies. Storage, humidity, and handling. If you've ever seen one of these printing presses work, right? It's all mechanized, it's all automatic, unless it's a sheet-fed, smaller offset printer. In any case, when you take the stack of 500, right, and you put it in the feeder, in this cartridge, you can't think like this. It's not like something about yay big. It's like this big. These things are huge, and so it normally takes 2 guys or 1 really strong guy to pick this whole thing up and just drag it in and put it in the actual feeder. When you do that, if you've used 100 and there's 400 left, you can imagine what happens to the paper on the side. They start shifting, right? This paper will start, and if you've got shifted paper like this, the printer can't actually pick up each sheet, and they do it with suction cups. The printer just goes, picks it up and puts it on the rollers, picks it up and puts it on the rollers, and it does it at this speed. Super, super fast. So, one more reason. By the time you're done printing 100 sheets, it's about the same amount of time it would take to print 500 sheets. At that speed, if you can print let's just make it simple and say you print 10. You print 10 sheets per second, okay? And that's just about the speed that most high-end offset sheet-fed printers run. 10 sheets a second, and you're trying to print 500 sheets, 50 seconds. It takes less than a minute to go through that stack of 500. 100, 10, 10 sheets a second, it'll only take 10 seconds. It takes less than a minute to print all 500. So either you're going to spend 10 seconds or you're going to spend 50 seconds to print this much or this much. You see, that's why there's really no price difference. So number one, the handling of it. All the sheets have to be perfect, in perfect condition. Number two is the storage of it. Where are you going to take this 400 sheet ream that's, remember, this big, and leave it somewhere? And it's like this big. It's huge. Where are you going to leave this much paper in a busy factory for, I don't know, a couple days, a couple months, however long it takes? There's really no place to put it. There really isn't, unless you have a printing press or a print shop in Montana somewhere, and you own 50 acres of land where you can just put these things. Well, what if you stack them up with another print job that needs, well, you can't mix paper. All the paper has to be the same. So that's number two, handling and storage. And number three, humidity. Your laser printer, your inkjet printer, your home printer, whatever printer it is, the humidity really doesn't matter that much because you're either heat fusing toner onto paper using laser toner, or you're just shooting ink onto paper. And so it really doesn't make that much difference as to how much humidity there is on the paper. But when you're dealing with offset printing is a combination of oil versus water. So it's oil versus water. And what is humidity? It's water. Oil versus water. So it's on this side. Water. What ends up happening to paper that's been sitting out for a while, even a day or two, or even for one afternoon, if storm clouds start rolling in, it sucks up all the humidity in the air, and it greatly changes how much oil-based ink sticks on the paper. It really does. So let's say you're printing not 500 copies, but 1,000 copies. And they're from two different reams of paper, right? So the first 500 is a fresh brand new ream that's in a vacuum sealed, plastic sealed container, one of these big things. It goes into the press, and then the next 500 sheets, or 400 sheets, now that we only have 400 left from doing your 100 copies, making 900 total sheets of paper, gets thrown into the printing machine. Guess what happens? The colors and the richness, the printing quality, even if the layering is perfect, right? Even if the layering is absolutely perfect, and there's none of this going on or none of this going on between the 500 sheets and the 400 sheets that are stacked on top of it. Let's say it's just perfectly aligned, and the suction cups can pick each one of these up perfectly without any jamming or any misalignment, right? What's going to happen is the 400 sheets of paper are going to have a very different look than the printing done on the 500 sheets. So there again, we can't reuse the paper. I'm not going to go into the super ridiculously long answer, which starts with, well, can't you take these big sheets of 400 that are left and just cut them up into smaller sheets? And now that if you cut them up 8 times 400, you got 3,200 sheets. It's going to be this thick, right? I'm not going to go into the answer to that because, okay. Let's go to the next point on the long answer. The next point on the long answer is ink. Ink. Ink is the number 2 highest cost center in printing. Number 1 is obviously paper, because we spent how many minutes talking about paper. Paper equals about 60 to 70% of the cost of the printing. So if you want cheaper printing, all you have to do is get yellower paper. All you have to do is get lower quality paper, and you'll get cheaper printing. To a point. If you're printing on cheaper paper, it's also harder to achieve good colors. So if you're asking the printing company, hey, can you print on really cheap paper, but I want really bright, good color, stunning photos, what's going to happen is that this press operator guy that's being paid $70 an hour, $70 an hour, in euros, that's like 50, 60 euros an hour, is going to have to spend twice as much time trying to get you better color on crappy paper. So when that happens, most printing companies are going to say, no, we just don't have that much time We can't do it. And so you're defeating your own purpose. If you want to use cheap paper to drop down the quality or the cost of your printing, then you're going to have to be okay with poor quality photos and colors, because that's just how it's going to be. Otherwise, you're going to raise the cost of labor because you drop the cost of paper. And that doesn't really make sense, does it? So that's the number one factor with paper. Ink is the number two biggest cost center in printing. Ink, 2 ounces of, let's say, magenta, just 2 ounces of oil-based magenta ink from any regular Japanese ink maker, or heaven forbid, a German or Swiss ink maker, they cost twice to 3 times as much. Just a regular Japanese oil-based magenta maker, for 2 ounces, that costs more than 2 ounces of Chanel No. 5 perfume. It's true. Look it up. Printing inks, oil-based inks, are extremely expensive. You've tried to buy perfume for your wife or your girlfriend, or yourself if you're a female watching this. You know how many times you think and how hard it's just outrageous how printing ink is more expensive. So the second point to how much it costs to print books or magazines, it really depends on how much ink you'll be using. And how much ink you'll be using is completely dependent on how dark your photographs are and how many photographs you have. So now, as you see, if you're a photographer or you're an artist or an illustrator and you want to create a portfolio book, or you're a travel tour company and you want to take really, really beautiful photographs of the scenery in, I don't know, in Fiji, that's a lot of cyan. Or in Tuscany, oh, that's a lot of cyan and yellow. Or let's say in Arizona, you're doing a tour of the Grand Canyon. That's a heck of a lot of yellow and magenta. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so we went deep into paper and we went deep into ink. Let's go briefly, very, very briefly, deep into quality. Quality is determined by 2 main factors. Number 1, the press operator, how good he is and how anal he is. Number 2, the actual press itself. The press operator, you're not going to know how good he is until you see samples of his work. The main things to look for is the quality of the color, but the quality of the color really can be messed up from the designer. The designer might actually want really weird looking colors, and so the press operator can't really do much about that except do exactly what the designer wants, right? Where you can tell the press operator's skill is the registration. Take a loop to anything that he's printed and see if you can see, especially on knockouts, white letters on brown, or completely white letters on some dark purple color. See if you can see any fringe of cyan or magenta just bleeding out underneath, slightly just peeking out from underneath. If you can, he's not a very good press operator. Number 2 point is the press. The press, you can either use printing presses made in India, really, really poor quality, and they vibrate a lot. That's the main difference between all these machines. The more vibration you have, the less fidelity you have, and the less registration perfection you have. So there's printers made in India, then there's printers made in China, then there's printers made in Japan, then there's printers made in Germany. And you can kind of tell which ones are going to be cheap, less cheap, not cheap, and expensive, right? Obviously, the ones made in Germany are the best ones. We use Heidelbergs. They're made in Germany, and they're extremely expensive. Each printer, each press costs about $1 million. Yes, $1 million US dollars. So that's about what, 880,000 euros right about now? It's about 600,000 pounds, British pounds. That's how expensive these printing presses are. Minimum. So now, let's go back to that. Well, why doesn't it cost that much more to print 500 versus 100 copies? Are you starting to see the picture? Imagine you're trying to rent a car that costs $1 million. Let's say you're actually renting a car, a Bugatti, right? And remember, it costs about 10 seconds of time to print 100 copies, and it costs 50 seconds of time to print 500 copies. 10 seconds versus 50 seconds is all it takes. So now you tell the car rental company, the exotic car rental company, hey, I want to rent this Bugatti for 50 seconds. That's how long it takes on this $1 million machine versus, and then he'll say, if you want to rent it for 50 seconds, okay, yeah, sure, give me $2,000. Okay, what if I only want to rent it for 10 seconds? $2,000, but 50 seconds is 5 times longer than 10 seconds. You see, it doesn't make any difference. Heidelberg and its operator are extremely expensive. So whether your printing takes a minute or your printing takes 3 minutes to do, and it really only takes minutes. Let's say you're printing 10,000 copies versus 20,000 copies. At this point, the main real big difference is the cost of the paper. And then the second is the cost of the ink, because printing 10,000 copies versus printing 20,000 copies, the only time difference is going to be about 10 minutes. 10 minutes of difference on a $1 million machine that you're monopolizing. Okay, so now let's just briefly go through quality versus price on the printing presses. If you're printing on a India-made printing press, that's going to be your cheapest, and they're normally only in India. The India-built printing presses are such poor quality that the Chinese won't even use them in China. It's really that simple. Number two, Chinese-made printing presses, some Chinese companies use, mainly for stuff that gets printed on rag paper, such as newspapers, the National Chinese Newspaper, or Trader Joe's Fearless Flyer. Yeah, that's okay to print on a Chinese printing press. A lot of the Japanese will actually use Japanese printing presses because they know that in China, Apple is a miracle. It's built in Shenzhen, China, and it's that high quality. Well, it's because it's run by Apple. The factory is maintained by Taiwanese management, and it's quality controlled by Apple. So that's why it's so awesome. Everything other than that, you've bought stuff from China. That's what happens. So the Chinese, even their printing presses are brought in from Japan or from Germany. The prices are as follows. If something costs you $1 to print on an Indian press, it'll cost you about $1.30 to print in China on a Chinese press. It'll cost you about $1.50 to $1.60 to print on a Japanese press, and it'll cost you about $1.80 to $2 to print on a German press in China. So, okay, what if you print, let's not go any deeper down that rabbit hole. Let's move over to Korea. Our headquarters is in Korea. And the difference is, if you print in Korea versus China, China's labor cost is about 20% less than Korea, 20%. But remember, the cost of paper is about 70% of the total cost. And the cost of paper is also about 20% cheaper. So all in all, printing in China is going to be about 20% cheaper than printing in Korea. But here's the main problem. China isn't a westernized country. It doesn't have a, I was going to say NAFTA, but FTA, a free trade agreement with America. So if anything goes wrong in China, you have really no recourse. It's really hard for you to just fly into China, into Beijing or Peking, and talk to the owner of the company and complain or have a meeting. It's a super high risk option. So what we do, we own plants in China. But what we'll do is we print in China or Korea or Japan or wherever you need us to print. But since our corporation is legally in Korea and in America, you can communicate with us. And it's easy to reach us and it's easy to work together. So the printing prices will be a little bit more expensive, but it's a lot safer working with a company. It's the same with Mexico. Let's say you wanted to only print in Mexico. And we have printing presses in Mexico, by the way. But let's say you didn't want to work with us in Mexico. You have a friend that has a friend who knows a guy that owns a printing plant in Mexico. So you're going to get a better deal than you would with us. It's possible. Although we are going to give you 10% lower prices, we can generally beat anybody's quote by 10% if you show us their estimate sheet. Because their estimate sheet generally is going to use cheaper quality paper and lower quality inks than we use. So if we match their cheap paper and their crappy ink, we can get you a 10% discount from their low prices. Now that having been said, If you still want to go with your buddy who has a buddy who knows a guy who owns a factory in Mexico, and you print with a guy in Mexico, and things don't work out, guess what? The legal system in Mexico, and I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole at all, is totally different than the legal system in America or the UK or Canada. It's a totally different legal system. You can't sue the guy. You'll probably get thrown in jail and on some trumped up, fake, bogus charges. It's happened. It really has. So if you're going to get printing done in Mexico, and it's not us that you choose, we strongly suggest that you at least get printing done in Mexico by a company whose parent company is in America. Because at least then you'll have some ability to communicate with them, and you'll have legal recourse. Finally, signatures. This is something that very few of you know. If you really want to lower your cost of printing, you remember how in the beginning of this video we said that each huge broadsheet or signature has 8 sheets on either side, right? On both sides. What that means is that you're going to have 16 pages on this really, really big sheet. So you have this big sheet of paper, and there's page 1's here, page 2's here, page 3's here, page 4's here, page 5, 6, 7, 8. No, that's not how it works. It's not, because what ends up happening is you have to fold this paper, and then you have to fold the paper again, and then you have to fold the paper again. By the time you fold it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, I think it is. I'm surprised I don't remember this number. Anyway, that's the only way to get page 1 and page 16 on opposite sides of the paper. Take any magazine, for instance. Open it up, just look at it opened up, covered down. Page 1 is on this side, and page 16 is on this side, like this. So you print page 16 next to page 1, right? I'm telling you this because there are people that want 34-page magazines, or let's do 8 times 3 is 24, 26-page magazines. It doesn't work that way. Printing comes in sets of 16 pages at a time. So you're either going to get 16 pages, or you're going to get 32 pages, or you're going to get, what's the next after 16, 32, 48 pages. If you want 46 pages, you know what we have to physically do to that third huge sheet of paper that would normally have 48 pages, but since you only wanted 46 pages? We manually have to take by hand, scissors, or we don't use scissors, but we cut the last 2 pages off. Then we fold it differently, and then we cut them separately and manually do the binding, so that we get you your 46 pages that you wanted instead of the 48 pages that would have come across naturally without any manual labor. Does that make any sense? We should do a separate video on this, but suffice it to say that if your page count, your page numbers, don't end up in even multiples of 16, you're asking for manual labor, and that drives up your printing costs by 5, 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30%, depending on how many pages difference, and depending on how busy the printer happens to be at that time. So I'm going to wrap up by telling you that the cheapest way to get good quality printing is to print, if you have time, if you have about a month to ship to America or to the UK, the cheapest way and the highest quality way, where you can work with a company that is similar to the way business is done in the UK or America, work with a Korean company, us, with a German printing press, or several of them, us, and make sure that your designs are in multiples of 16 pages. So 16 pages, 32 pages, 48 pages, and so on. And use good paper. Use good paper. Don't skimp on the paper, because it'll make a huge difference on the quality, the look of the final product. And to get a quote from us, contact us at 8print.co.